Well, and ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another segment of 40 years ago in the life of Jim Cornette and the transition to Mid South Wrestling. And Brian, we last left off, we were just about to start February, and February the 1st was a Wednesday. And that meant we were back in Shreveport, not only for our regular morning interview session from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., where we did all the local promos, but a TV taping that night of two different Mid-South television programs that would air around the territory for the next several weeks. And we're right in the middle of the feud with Wrestling 2 and Magnum TA. And on the first tape that we did that night, just by my notes, they recapped the belt whipping where we had, at the previous taping, taken my belt off of my suit and whipped the shit out of the baby faces. And they did an interview. And then on the second tape of the night, we had a match with a couple of job guys, but I warned Bill Watts he's starting to overreach himself because he's starting to fine people for, like, when we ran in on 2 and TA, and we hit the ring again on Wrestling 2 this night and rip his mask trying to take it off. And so we're just at maintenance for the angle that we've got ongoing, because the good parts are still to show in some of the major towns. And that, again, a long day. We start, even though we were already in Shreveport, we had been in Monroe the previous night, so went over and got a room. We start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you don't get back home until, past midnight. And then the following day, February 2nd, we were in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which is almost to Little Rock. So it's like a 500-mile round trip for a fucking, again, this is a spot show. We wrestled Lanny Poffo and Brian Adias, who must have been on loan for the month from Fritz. That's the thing. Fritz sent him talent. Well, let's send him Brian. And I mean, they did $13,000 in Pine Bluff on a spot show, which in today's money, as we've mentioned before, 3-1. So that would be what, $39,000 for a spot show in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. We made $200 for a preliminary match, but goddamn, that's a long day, right? And then we get back to Alexandria the following day. We're in Baton Rouge, and this is the first time we've been in Baton Rouge for an angle match with 2 and TA. So in this one, remember, we'd been doing the board thing. I think they got somewhat sympathetic to Bobby Eaton's fucking head. And when Magnum's doing his comeback, he gives Dennis a belly to belly, which was his finish back even then. But the referee is trying to put Wrestling 2 out of the ring, and I give Bobby the powder, and he fucking throws it in TA's eyes. And the referee turns and sees the cloud, and we get disqualified. But then Magnum is blind, and we get two down, and we leave him laying in the ring. And this one, Brian, was when, I guess I haven't mentioned that for the first 4 weeks or so that we were there, and when we started doing these, well, we didn't do it the preliminary matches. When we started doing the angle matches, I didn't carry the racket back from the ring. Either Bobby or Dennis did, at their suggestion. Have I mentioned this to you?
I remember you saying that Dennis used to hold the racket sometimes, and then I think you said he was afraid he was going to kill somebody, so he gave it to you or Bobby.
He gave it to Bobby. And then this was the night that I got back possession of it. Because here's the deal. When we had started doing these angle matches for a couple weeks previously, and I started seeing in the thing in Houston and everything, I see, you know what? I need to load this racket up, right? That's the first time I had the thought, I need something besides the racket. But since they were taking the racket, I still wanted something, right? So I had gone, and you could get this. I don't know how easily you can get it these days, but remember, every woman used to have a fucking spray thing, a mace in her purse, right? Pepper spray.
Right.
Well, I got me, if one of the boys, and the reason why Dennis had said, On the way back from the ring, the deal was Dennis would go in front. He'd have the racket, so he's got a weapon. He wanted me to stay behind him and keep my hands on his shoulders so he could know I was there without having to turn his head and look for me. And Bobby would get right behind me and make sure to watch my back because I was probably going to be the target. But that when we're tight, we don't let any room get in between us. And if the cops are willing and they're there and they surround us, then that's the way we're going to go back through. Well, that was, like I said, for a while, but I still wanted something. So I got the fucking pepper spray just in case, right? Because I could put it right in my inside jacket pocket. Well, this is the night after this match, and we leave the fucking heels laying, and the goddamn cops get around us, and we're in the formation that I talked about. And goddamn, about halfway back, once we get through ringside, the people can start running up from the sides. And somebody came up and goddamn clocked Dennis. Bam! And turned around and started running the other way. Well, Buddy Landell was watching because he was riding with us. He was watching from the entryway and trying to see what was going to happen to see if we need any help. And when he saw that, he took off running for the guy. So it was like he was going to intersect him. The fan had punched Dennis and turned around and was running one way. Buddy was running in the other direction from the entranceway to tackle him. And Dennis took off running for the guy the same way. So they fucking got to him at the same time. Buddy was broken field running through all these people on the floor, tackled the guy and spun him around with his arms behind his back like he was going to hold him for the cops. And Dennis got there and fucking crowned him with the tennis racket. And what I had done to the tennis racket was I had taped a large dog's choker chain around the outside edge of it. And I had taken 10 snips and I had cut a metal, like a cookie sheet, in the shape of a tennis racket and pushed it in and put the cover over it and duct taped that all together. So it not only had some heft to it, but it would sting if you hit it sideways, right? Because I would hit the guys flat, but he'd hit a mark sideways. Well, what Dennis did was he hit this guy flat over the head with it, but so hard that when he drew it back, it looked like a goddamn kitchen cooking pot. It had bent in the shape of this guy's head. And so when we got back, oh, and by the way, that's when I lost my goddamn pepper spray also. Because when Dennis took off to hit the guy over the head with the goddamn racket and Buddy had tackled him, Bobby got in a skirmish with somebody and a guy came up and tried to punch me, and I slipped it and I grabbed his fucking shirt collar and I had the fucking mace in my hand and I stuck it up in front of his face and said, "I will make you wish you were never born if you don't get the fuck out of here." And he turned around and run off, and somebody goddamn blocked my hand, and the mace flew in the crowd. And then the cops we finally get everybody back, right? And that's when Dennis said, I'll kill somebody. Don't. But that was Baton Rouge at the Centroplex. And that was where later on in the year, the guy would take a swing at me coming back and Dundee'd get on him and drill him. And that would lead to that lawsuit I told you about that one time where Dundee couldn't go back to Baton Rouge for a couple months because nobody knew who he was. He was the booker, so he wasn't advertised. Cops didn't know who he was. He was the unnamed co-conspirator.
With an Australian accent.
Well, they didn't hear him talk. But anyway, nevertheless, so that was Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jimmy Kilshaw was the local promoter. The guy with the fucking carbuncle on his neck or whatever, and he had been involved with wrestling since the 50s or 60s, and in Baton Rouge, state capital, he knows who to pay off. That's why I was told that we had to run Laranja, No, was it Laranja or Homa? We had to run Laranja because somebody there was politically connected over in Baton Rouge and could make sure we could get the Centroplex. I don't know what the fuck was going on down there. But anyway, we did a $14,000 house, which was closing in on 2,000 people and had been better than they had been doing. And as a matter of fact, then the following day, we went to Laranja, Louisiana. And we were in the main event there at that shitty building. That's the place where the locker room may have been 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, and the floor had to have boards put over it because it was always so wet and dirty you couldn't walk on it. And then you would go out the locker room door, and you'd be in the arena and turn right and go out into the parking lot, and the parking lot was mud. And generally you'd rather change clothes in your car than, if you had room, than to actually be in the locker room. But the guy that ran this town, they wouldn't take when they would take an intermission in the middle of the night, they wouldn't start the show again until the guy had sold enough shit from the concession stand. And I'm not talking about food. He had a goddamn flea market in this building. They sold cakes. I saw him sell a fucking shotgun one night. They sold fucking car parts. It was like there was a flea market section in this building. The Laranja, goddamn, what was it? Maybe rec center, whatever. And the only reason this guy had wrestling was to get a crowd in there to buy his shit. And some point, we're wanting to fucking leave so bad. Goddamn, ring the bell. Start this show. Let us get the fuck out of here. When he'd have an auction, some of the guys would start bidding on shit to see if he'd make enough money to start the show again. And that was the ring was not only as hard as the floor, but the ropes weren't even wrapped. Have you ever seen a wrestling ring with just naked ropes?
No.
Well, you did here. And Grizzly Smith called a finish one night where Hacksaw Duggan would give me 2 body slams in Laranja on that ring. And so we get in there and Duggan picks me up for the first one, and I said, 1 slam. And I'd already told Hercules Hernandez, hit the goddamn ring as soon as he slams me. Don't let him slam me again. But anyway, here against 2 and TA, we were disqualified because Bobby jumped off the top rope. And we got out of there because it was goddamn Laranja. And that is remember what you were talking about where they sent Precious back to the locker room because the crowd was too dangerous? After we were in Laranja on February the 4th, that was a Saturday night that they had to take up with that fucking town. It did $8,300. So there was 1,000 people or a little more in this goddamn barn on the side of the road. And we made $150, and then we drive to Baton Rouge. We got to get a hotel room because the next afternoon, Sunday afternoon at 2:00, we're 100 miles away in Galliano, Louisiana. And it's the Midnight Express, and it's just a spot show, off-topic match, Midnight Express versus Junkyard Dog and Magnum TA. No fucking angle between us and Dog, otherwise than obviously we're mad at TA, right? That's the main event. They had Chris Adams and Jimmy Garvin, and I think like 2 or 3 other matches. And it was just a spot show. And again, this little recreation center, they put Galliano, Louisiana, is a fishing village on the south end of Louisiana near the water. Obviously, they're fishing. They're on the water, on some of the swamps and the bayous. And there's one road in and one road out of this town. And we get there and we find this place is sold out. $10,800 house, which in today's money, again, it'd be over 30 grand. There's easily 1,000, 1,200 people packed in this place on a Sunday afternoon. And we were told once we got there, by the way, it is a fishing village. All these people are drunk and have been drunk since Friday night. What? They come in off the boats on Friday night and they start drinking. This is what the cops are telling us. I mean, this is not some goddamn program vendor. The police that are in the building are saying they come in off the boats on Friday night. They fucking start drinking. They go to church on Sunday morning. This is the goddamn last thing they're going to do. They're going to go to sleep tonight and they're going to go back out on the fucking boats. So mind your P's and Q's type of thing. Because every single one of these people is raging drunk. And as soon as as soon as we saw the first match, the reaction, we're watching from the locker room door, right? Jimmy Garvin got a good look at it, and later on, Dundee comes in the locker room and says, "Okay, Jimmy, you have your match, shine him up a little bit, then get some heat on him." And Jimmy said, "Get what? You expect me to get heat out there? What the fuck's the matter with you, Bill?" He wanted to just have Chris beat him up and then do the finish, right? So they go out there, and just on the entrance, so many of these drunk guys have grabbed Precious's ass and try to pull her sweater off and pulling at the boa and the fucking perfume sprayer. Jimmy takes his shit off, gives it to her, and it tells the cops, "Wait, she's coming back with you," and sends her back because there was only like 3 or 4 feet between the ring and the front row. And it's like a place you'd play recreational basketball in a town, right? It's that type of place. So it's tight. And so then I'm supposed to go out there, and Dundee said, "Well, just do a DQ. Get the heat on fucking," once again, we're saying get the heat, but get the heat on fucking Dog, and then give Magnum the tag so that he can roll Bobby up and just throw Magnum over the top rope. And the reason he wanted to heat on Dog is because Dog couldn't take the bump over the top rope in those days at that point, the condition he was in. So I talked to the cops, and they said, "We're going to stay right next to you." So I think they had 4 uniformed police officers with billy clubs and guns, right? They were legitimate, but they only had 4 in the whole place. So they gave them all to me, and they just walked us out to the ring and stood behind me, all 4 of them, where people couldn't even see me. And I'm just hugging the ring post. I ain't going to do shit in this match, right? And Bobby and Dennis took bumps for the baby faces, and then they got a little heat, and then the tag and the comeback. And by the time that Magnum went over the top rope, we were already on the floor and headed back to the locker room. And once we got in there, the cops locked the door and said, "We'll come back and get you later." And we had to sit there for fucking almost an hour because they had to go out. They had to clear all the people out of the building. And then they had to clear most people out of the parking lot. And then they came and got us, unlocked the door, took us to our car, and then surrounded the car on foot and walked us to the road. And they had already told us, look, because we were going to Thibodaux. We had a show that night in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And they said, "Look, it'd probably be a good idea. Don't stop in this town. Just when you turn left, keep going. Because there's only one road in and one road out. And if they get us on the they get on the wrong side in between us and where we're going, we got to go past them, right?" So off we go to Thibodaux. And the match had just started. The Midnight's match had just started when somebody threw a fucking beer in Bobby's eyes, and he was blind. And I'm trying to help him wipe his eyes out with my tail of my jacket while the cops are watching to make sure nobody sticks me in the fucking ribs with a knife. So it was a wonderful Sunday afternoon. And then we get to Thibodaux, and we got to have the match with 2 and TA where we get disqualified and leave them laying there. And the cops had to walk us out of that fucking place and get us in the car. And Thibodaux was only 50 miles from Galliano, but it's still not exactly right in the center of things. And then we were 150 miles away from Alexandria. So, we started the morning at the hotel in Baton Rouge. We went to Galliano, worked, sat around while they cleared the potential assassins, went to Thibodaux, did another fucking match. The house there was $18,700. So that was over 2,000 people. And we made $500, which is the equivalent of $1,500 today a piece for the day. But we started at fucking whatever time in the morning and didn't get back to Alexandria until, probably about 1:30. And that's why I was saying earlier when we were talking on, I think it was a previous segment at this point, the reason why a world-class talent, Brian, may have been on the card at a spot show is because they were in for the weekend. Yeah, Laranja Galliano and Thibodeau are shit fucking places to go. But between the three of those shows in a 24-hour period, Mid-South Wrestling grossed almost $40,000, which would be 120 grand today. So he said, yeah, send me these two guys or this match or whatever off your TV that airs in these markets, and I'm going to work them on these shows over the weekend. And boy, did he.
When you guys are locked in that room, what do you guys talk about?
Whether the fuck we're going to get out of there alive or not.
I mean, this was a new situation for you. Was this had Dennis ever experienced anything like this?
Well, yeah, Dennis, most of the three of us, Dennis had, had some heat and worked on top and been in the small towns. And he was usually prepared for any eventuality. But at the same time, we all got to be looking at, because Dennis, this was a new level for anybody that hadn't worked the Louisiana territory. Even veteran heels, the frequency and the frequency that something occurred with somebody hitting the ring or somebody getting involved in something coming from the ring, or just the cops having to take extra precautions. It was almost everywhere in these fucking towns. And that was a little off-putting even to the veterans. But at the same time, we know, okay, we're in this room. We ain't going to leave until the cops come get us. There are no windows. We don't know what's going on outside. There's no cell phones. There's no internet. So we're just sitting there waiting for them to fucking come and get us. They promised they were going to get us off the property safely. We're going to hold them to it. I mean, what else can you do?
Do any of the veterans there say anything to you guys about how much heat you're getting so quickly?
Yeah, well, I've mentioned that from the start when they saw me, they say, oh, God, you got to watch out, or various forms of that. But, I mean, they're not going to.
Now it's happening. Now it's starting to happen.
Yeah, and in those days, guys didn't just go up, oh, man, you had a great match. What a great match you had, right? Nobody did that in those days to the level they do it today. And if it were really your best friends, you would, say something or put them over. But for the most part, it was just the acknowledgement that a lot of the guys would come up and say, well, hey, we're going to, because see, in Galliano, this particular time I'm talking about, it's a double shot. We were last. Everybody else is gone. We're the only ones in the locker room. Everybody else had to go because they've got to get there and do the fucking show because we're on last in goddamn Thibodeau. So we had nobody but the cops to help. But a lot of times in these towns, you would see that Nikolai or Butch Reed or, Buddy rode with us a lot. They would say, well, we'll start, sticking around to watch and make sure you get back okay. That was more important than, hey, you guys are really getting a lot of heat and drawing money that we weren't drawing before. It's like, hey, we'll help you, that type of thing. Everything's positive. And then, as a matter of fact, now that I'm looking at the schedule, probably since some of the world-class talent was in, they were also in on Monday because Monday, February 6th was New Orleans. And even though we went back to Alexandria, Thibodeau is not that far from New Orleans. So for people who didn't live anywhere around, they probably stayed over. And New Orleans was another match with 2 and TA for us. Remember, the last time was a disqualification and we bailed at the St. Bernard building. This time we're back in the downtown building and it's another $30,800 house. And we got $350, which is a little over $1,000 today. And this one, I tossed the racket in while the referee is putting Magnum out, and Wrestling 2, after giving Bobby the knee lift, sees that and dives for me, but Dennis has the racket and whacks him from behind and shoots him in and clotheslines him with the racket behind the referee's back who's checking on TA, and Bobby covers 2 and we beat him. And that didn't set well. So now we're doing, and by the way, these are non-title matches for the Mid-South Tag Team title. They're still the champions, but they said we needed to prove ourselves by, beating them first or whatever the fuck the deal was. So we've had double DQs. We've had crazy thrown out finishes. Now we're starting to fuck them in these non-title matches. So that's getting a little bit more, heat from the people because we're fucking them. And the people didn't like that back in those days. So anyway, another lovely goddamn. Oh, and by the way, the reason why we went back to goddamn Alexandria on Sunday night and then back to New Orleans is because we had to go on from New Orleans. We were in Biloxi the next day on February 7th, and that's 60 miles past New Orleans, farther from our homes. So we got a hotel room and stayed in New Orleans and then went on to Biloxi the next day. And I've mentioned before how badly I hated Biloxi, Mississippi as a building, have I not? The Mississippi Gulf Coast Coliseum, that big, giant 18,000 seat building that was dark as a fucking tomb, that we never drew in, that even a goddamn big house that we had one time looked like a piss hole in a snowbank, and that we got jumped on and attacked in the goddamn dark on numerous occasions. Have I mentioned that town?
I'm not sure.
Well, I'm mentioning it now. And I don't know what happened this night. We were wrestling Junkyard Dog and Magnum TA. So no, it didn't happen this night. But this is the town where that big fucking corn-fed farm guy came at Bobby Eaton and fucking tackled him, and Bobby front face locked the guy, and the guy had to be 6'4", 350 and stood up underneath Bobby. And it looked like Bobby looked like he was the trunk on an elephant. The guy was swinging Bobby in the air. Bobby wouldn't let go, and the guy wouldn't go down. He wiped out all the ringside seats with Bobby until Bobby could fucking ground the motherfucker. The cops are fighting people. The fucking old man comes up to me. He's wearing one of those old fucking old man hats from the 50s and got a cigar stuck in his mouth. He's reaching in his pocket. Well, fuck it. I kicked him in the fucking balls. And then I think Dennis ended up with a black eye on that trip back, and somebody bloused my eye, and Bobby was scraped all up from being taken a tour around ringside by Plowboy fucking Mississippi. Yeah, it was a fun town because they was so dark. They were only using part of the building, and you had to walk into pitch blackness to get back to the locker room area, and there wasn't any barricades. So they would rush you when they were mad and do shit. That's the town. When we used my belt, I believe, to close. No, it might have been my shoe to knock Ricky Morton out. Ricky was laying there flat of his back in a fucking ring with one eye open, watching us get the shit kicked out of us, trying to get back to the fucking locker room, dying laughing at us. Anyway, Biloxi, Mississippi. Lousy house, $7,200.
What'd you think of the movie Biloxi Blues?
I didn't see it.
Based on the play, Biloxi Blues.
Because I've had previous ill will with Biloxi.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Neil Simon, but okay.
Here's what we had to do. We had to get on Interstate 10 in Biloxi after the show, which probably got out about 10 o'clock. And we had to go through New Orleans to Baton Rouge and then take the state highway from Baton Rouge back to Alexandria. So Biloxi was 250 miles, and it was a 5-hour drive. We got back probably about 3 a.m. And God damn it, I needed to leave my house at 6:30 a.m. to go to Shreveport and do interviews. Those cocksuckers booked Biloxi on a Tuesday night. Oh, I hated them. And then we did interviews on Wednesday, February 8th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Shreveport, Louisiana. And then hopped in the car and fucking drove to goddamn Lafayette, which was 100 miles over. And I'm trying to remember why we had 2 matches in a row with TA and Dog instead of TA and 2, but I don't know. But finally it was a double disqualification, and Bobby grabbed the racket and Dog grabbed the chain, and it was a standoff, so we ran off. And that was all that happened there because it was a lousy fucking house. More on Lafayette later. And then the following night, February 9th, was Lake Charles, Louisiana, where we did another. Remember, I think the last one was $5,600 or something. Well, this one was $6,800. It's coming up slowly. But another match with Magnum TA and Wrestling 2. where I throw the powder in Two's face and get disqualified, and TA chases me into the ring, but Dennis hangs him up in the ropes as he's trying to get to me. And I'm keeping him off balance while Dennis and Bobby are kicking a shit out of Wrestling 2, and then Junkyard Dog comes and makes the save. Because Brian, in about a month or so, maybe not even, remember, Wrestling 2 is not only going to turn heel, but he's going to be the end of Junkyard Dog for a while in Mid-South. So it was even more hard for the people to stomach that when Dog had been coming out to rescue Wrestling 2 from getting the shit kicked out of him, and then to have to do things like that to Magnum, his partner, and Dog, his friend. Got a little bit more heat, right? So anyway, and then we finish up the weekend with a bang, and there's a moral to the story here. And Brian, you've been asking when did you realize this, or when did you know that, or were you doubting things, or you know the questions you've been asking. And this weekend, Friday, February 10, Saturday, February 11, is where we really got some answers and we started to feel really good. And I will explain why. And by the way, I'm an idiot. I should have mentioned this earlier, because before we started recording, I did a little research. I know I'm talking about these matches. Well, we did this and did that and blowing by it, right? And it's hard to picture if you've never seen them before. You and I have seen the tapes many times. But this stuff is on YouTube. You know me, I'm an internet idiot, right? I go to YouTube and type in Midnight Express versus 2 and TA Houston, and all kinds of shit pops up. None of it, I don't know who any of these people are. None of it's probably legal. But the Houston matches exist because we've talked about how Paul did his TV there. It was customized, and they shot raw footage of all the matches, and then they'd go back and use on TV what they wanted, right? And then the same thing that Watts would do sometimes with the camera in Oak City or Tulsa or someplace.
Well, Houston TV also started incorporating clips from Watts' show once in '83 they made the deal.
Right. So it was and it was an hour and a half, so you had more time. But I looked on you, not only that, but some of the Mid-South TV, including the compilations of the interview we did where we tarred and feathered Magnum, the angle there. All this stuff is there if you look for it. Folks, I'm endorsing no one. But one guy even had a playlist, as the kids call it, of all of the Midnight Express matches from the year that we're talking about, including this one this weekend. So, if again, totally illegal, not plugging anyone, but you can see this shit, folks. If they won't put it on the cock, it's still easy to find until YouTube goes under. So this was Friday, February 10th, as I said, in Houston, and it was the main event against 2 and TA, and this is, Brian Hildebrand was there. He had come down to spend the weekend with us and take pictures for the magazine, right? Mark Curtis. And so there's a picture that I've got that you probably got it in the Wrestling News files, of me throwing powder in Wrestling 2's face and the cloud being perfectly enveloping him and all that shit, right? You remember that?
I do.
He took it this night. And this was the Paul Bosch story, because I just went back and looked at the last 2 or 3 minutes of it. I hadn't seen it in years. And now that I'm looking at it for this, we almost got killed, I think, that night. Because the deal was that boom, 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 all this shit's going on. The referee's distracted. I throw the powder in Wrestling 2's face, and fucking Magnum goes after me, and the referee sees it and calls the DQ, but Dennis wallops fucking Magnum while he's chasing me, and Magnum catches his leg in the bottom rope and hangs upside down from the bottom and second rope where his leg is caught. He's hanging off the apron out toward the floor, right? And so Bobby and Dennis get Wrestling 2 in the middle of the ring and start kicking the bejesus out of him and beating him with a racket. And I take my belt off and I start whipping the shit out of Magnum. And they just told me, and I'm going to do whatever the fuck, right? I'm doing what I'm told at that point. They had just told me, they said, just whip him until we fucking get the heat on Magnum and 2. And I think the referee was going to threaten to suspend me or something or other. Or I don't know if I had an out cue. Somebody was just going to come and get me. So I'm just whipping the shit. I got so tired standing on the apron and whipping him, and I can see the cops is starting to get in front of the people that are crowding up around the rail around where I'm at, but I've got tunnel vision. I'm just going to whip Magnum. And I'm tired bending over. And so I fucking jumped down on the floor. I figured, well, there's the cops. And I'm whipping the shit out of him again. And he's like fucking yelling too, like, God damn it. Because I'm laying him in. And what I don't realize until I saw this tape back, Brian, you've heard the stories of how, and you've seen the Houston footage, right? When there's shit going on in the ring, those people are yelling and screaming. It's loud, it's crazy, right? And all the tapes,
Right.
including some of this one earlier in the match. These people had stopped yelling and screaming. They were all standing. Nobody was leaving. People were starting to crowd closer around the ring, but the level of sound had gone down to the fucking murmur. And the house was $45,000. And in those, that was 5,000 or 6,000 people, probably, with prices in those days. So it was about a half a house, but still, it should have been louder. And you've heard the stories from the old timers, the white heat, the silent heat. When the crowd gets quieter, that's when you got to watch out. Apparently, that's what this was. And I didn't know it because I was too busy whipping the shit out of Magnum TA, right? I don't know what the fuck is going on around me. I'm in the main event in Houston, and I'm going to whip this motherfucker until somebody comes and gets me. And who came and got me was Paul Bosch, because he heard this, and they wouldn't stop beating up Wrestling 2 in the ring, Bobby and Dennis, and I wouldn't stop. And now when you see the wide shot from the hard camera, after we leave the ring and they're focusing on just the ring because it's raw footage, right? With Magnum selling and Two's trying to get his shit together. The cops have some guy on the far side that they've been over, they restrained with the fucking orange security shirt guy that used to take the jackets. And they're handcuffing him and going to drag him out. He's come over the rail. All these other fucking people are still standing and crowding around. I'm whipping him, and suddenly I feel a hand on my shoulder, and I hear the crowd pop at the same time, and you can hear it on the video. It goes from that murmur like, do we need to go down there and help these fucking people? As soon as they saw Paul Bosch put his hand on my shoulder, the crowd fucking pops like a baby face is making a comeback in the ring. They recognized Paul when he came to the ring. And it was like, okay, it's all right now. We don't need to take action. It's the goddamnedest, and there's no commentary on this match, so you can actually just hear it. And I feel his hand, and I look over, and there's Paul Bosch in my face. He says, get to the locker room now. I'm like, what? Go, get your boys. I'm fuck. So I jump in, and you see me jump in the ring and go, leave, we got to go. And I think it's Dennis. He's not fitting. He grabs the fucking belt from me, and he's going to fucking do something he's going to whip Magnum or something. And he goes over there and he sees Paul Bosch and turns around. And I'm still trying to corral Bobby and Dennis to get them out of the fucking ring, as Paul has told me, get the fuck out of here. And so the cops then crowd around us, and they've still got the fucking guy over on the other side. And all these people felt somewhat better about the situation because Paul Bosch had personally, involved himself in it to save the day, or we might have gotten fucking killed if we'd have tried to leave the ring without that happening. And we didn't even know it's only the third time we'd been in Houston, right? We didn't know what the fuck. So that's when he fucking came back and said, this was twice in a row. First, he yelled at Dundee the previous time. Then he's yelling at us. He said, you people are going to cause a riot here. And he keep it in the ring, calm it down. Okay, Paul, yes, sir. But we made $600 that night, which was the equivalent of modern day of $1,800 for the one night. And there we saw, okay, this is one of the biggest towns in the territory. We're obviously getting a reaction. So we think it's going to be okay, right? And if Paul had still been doing the payoffs, we'd probably got 1,500 and he might have fined us something. but this was on the Mid-South pay structure, so it was down, but still, it wasn't bad.
84 is the year everyone talks about Mid-South wrestling. Bill Watts always talked about the year the business exploded. He made more money that year than any other year. It's, the peak year of Mid-South wrestling. It's all downhill after that. But same thing for Houston. Houston had an amazing year. It was just as hot there, even though you consider that part of Mid-South, it was its own thing. JYD had gotten hot there before the Mid-South relationship, but everything exploded there, especially when the rock and roll came in. It ended up being one of the great years in Houston history, too.
And I've actually, hold on. Right at my fingertips, Brian Last, I have the information to make a comment on what you were saying.
That was quick.
Houston, Texas, in 1984, sold over 175,000 tickets and drew approximately $1,150,000 at the gate, based on what they told me and what I observed with my eyes. So in one town. And so and triple the money for modern day, so that's $3.5 million, right? The good old days. But anyway, so then that was good on Friday night, and we didn't get killed and we got over. And then Saturday, February the 11th, we were the main event in Shreveport, which was, again, we went home to Alexandria, got home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and at least we only had to, it was 2.5 hours to Shreveport the next day. And the people in Shreveport had been seeing us since we started because, as we mentioned, the Irish McNeil Boys Club was every other week. They taped the TV. Every other week was the Shreveport Municipal Auditorium, the old building that Elvis had been on that stage. And it was a regular town in the territory. And I mean, going back to the days when Buddy Fuller, ran that part of the country in the 50s and 60s and through the McGurk days, it had never been a big money town in the overall scheme of things, but it was steady for years, right? But it's the old building, and I don't know what the seating capacity was, to be honest, but it was one of those old auditoriums that they used to have, and the Kiel Auditorium was a grand version of it. This place, maybe you could get 3,000 people in, which is about what we probably had here, because that night were the main event against Magnum and Wrestling 2 with the lashes stipulation. Because since Shreveport had seen all these angles between the TV and then the live audience and everything, Dundee throws this in with what he's going to take around the territory later on. The loser of the match gets 10 lashes with a leather strap. And if they win, I'm included, right? So basically the promos are built around, we're going to, the heels, we're saying we're going to whip you like the dogs you are, but the baby faces are saying, we're going to give Cornette his lashes too. And that now the people have seen me do all this shit. They want to, nobody has touched me. The Midnight Express have not done a job. So, that's what they want to see. The house was $22,000. That doesn't sound that impressive, except it was the record house that they had ever done in that building by almost $5,000. Because as I said, the tickets back then were, let's say, 10, 7, and 4. $10 ringside, $7 general admission, $4 for kids. And it wasn't a big building. The ring was not on the stage. It was on the floor in front of the stage and did have some ringside. So, it was there 400 ringside seats? I don't think so. So you probably got a $7.50 ticket average, which meant they put 3,000 people in this building.
It also says a lot about the problems with the arguments about money now versus money then when it comes to pro wrestling. When people say like, oh, this person or this thing is more successful than anything was then. Different kind of fans. Fans then went. You could have sold out the building. But not only did they not sell tickets that were $30, $50, let alone a couple $100, there was no chance in hell it would have worked back then.
No, God,
Society was different. Fans were different. different kind of fan base.
Do you know? Let me just say this though. Do you know what the ticket price was the first time I saw Earth, Wind, and Fire live in concert?
What year would it have been? And no, I don't.
1970. Oh, God damn it. Was it nine?
That was a good year.
Nine?
That was a
well,
good year.
70. Oh, God, 8 or 9. Let's say $7.
That seems expensive for the time.
Well, but it was a big show. But that's what I'm saying. But at the same time, we were also at these towns, again, depending on the territory, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever the case. But nevertheless, that's when, because they came in and reported pretty much the house by the time the bell rang, because everybody was in there already. They weren't going to sell any more tickets. And then you have to realize, okay, yes, they've probably drawn this many people back in the days of Sputnik Monroe, right? In the early 60s, the tickets were cheaper then than this. So we've set the gate record. But just the fact that we set it, and we set it by that much, even in the modern era, when we're in the main event in a territory that we've only fucking been in for, they've been seeing us on TV for 10 weeks, tops in Shreveport, and they've seen us live like 3 times. So that was okay. Yeah, this is going to fucking be fine. And we made $350, which is equal to a little over 1,000 in today's money. So that week, for New Orleans, Biloxi, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Houston, Shreveport, and the following day, Lincoln's birthday, Sunday the 12th, in Little Rock, Arkansas, we made $1,765 and were the main event on most of those shows, except for Houston, the moderate markets. And then Little Rock was up to almost $17,000, and and Bobby got a board broke over his poor fucking head again. But they're starting to react. They're starting to go. In January, Little Rock was 10 grand. So we're making the equivalent of today over $5,000 a week in a week of moderate markets, and we've just got there. So now we're pretty well figuring this is going to work. To answer your question of, what were we thinking at the time? At first, we were like, eh. But then once we saw the response to this, it was almost like shit. And that's where I really learned how the business is supposed to work, or worked in the days when the angle you did, or the issue you had amongst the talent that you had working on top could make a massive difference in how you drew at the house shows. It was very simple. If you get the talent over and then you give them an issue that they can fucking have a conflict over, people want to come see this shit. If the talent's good and the booking's good, that's the fucking formula. And I've never seen it fail. If it fails, it's because one or the other ain't working. But anyway, you can look at this on YouTube apparently now, in an unofficial way, as we follow along the year of 1984, because we're about, a month away from the last Stampede angle and about 6 weeks away from setting every record in the goddamn territory.
All right, 6 weeks away, as you said.
6 weeks away
from setting those records, and we'll be here for those 6 weeks. Waiting.
Well, you can't afford to miss it.
All right. Well, this has been a look back at Mid-South 1984 with Super Mario, and we're gonna now return to your regular scheduled programming, but we will be returning, of course, with Part 2 of February 84, as Jim said, on the road to the last Stampede.
That's a spicy podcast.